Hebrews chapter 3. And I would like someone to read a longer section beginning in chapter 3, verse 7, and go all the way through chapter 4 and verse 2. While we read that, I'm going to set up my PowerPoint here. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7, and read through chapter 4, verse 2. Yeah, go ahead.
Therefore, the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with that generation, and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Beware, brethren, lest there be any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ, if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. While it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion. Failure of the will. Oh, I'm sorry, that's like a heading.
No. Yeah, keep going all the way through chapter 4 and verse 2.
For who, having heard, rebelled. Indeed, it is not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses. Now, with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not that those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Therefore, since the promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them, but the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he said, so I swore in my wrath that they shall not enter my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world.
Okay, so why do we read that in relation to Numbers 13 and 14? Yeah.
Because this is where they're at, and they're going into Canaan to search out the land and find other, that they need to take it over. And they came back and said, oh, we can't do that, I'll but two.
Right. So he quotes in Hebrews 3, he quotes from Psalm 95, which in turn is recapping the story of Numbers 13 and 14 that we're going to be studying this morning. And what does he say? What's his point there in quoting Psalm 95 in recapping that story? Go.
Well, the problem was that they were there, ready to go into the land. Moses sent spies in. We need to keep in mind, this was the land that God promised Abraham way back in Genesis chapter 12. So, the significance of all this is God said, all right, because of their unbelief, they do not get to go into the promised land of rest. It was a place where I was going to be with them. Everything was going to be provided for them when they went in there. It was going to be a place of rest. They don't get to go because of their unbelief. And then Hebrew writer is helping us to understand that, applying that for us today, that has to do with whether or not we get into the true promised land of rest, which is heaven.
All right. Good. Exactly.
I think what he's saying is don't make the same mistake they did.
Exactly. So, as Bill said, these chapters should be the pinnacle culmination of God's promises to his people, his promises all the way back to Abraham to give them the land, and everything we've been studying that God, taking them out of Egypt and at Mount Sinai, and getting them ready as a nation, and then what we've studied so far in Numbers, getting them ready to go, getting them organized, how they march, and getting the priests ready, getting everything ready. Finally, they get up and move and leave Mount Sinai, and they're traveling up, and this should be the moment that is the culmination of everything that God has been promising them, and yet, of course, it's not. And it's not because God doesn't keep his part of the promise, but as the Hebrews writer says, because of their unbelief, which leads to disobedience, rebellion. Okay, so they rebel because of their unbelief. And as he says, then the point is, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart. So when we read Numbers 13 and 14, when we study together, we should not be thinking about those crazy Israelites who just can't obey. Hebrews says the story is us. We need to be thinking about ourselves and applying it to us and our relationship with God. Chapter 4, verse 2. Good news came to us just as to them. They had the good news. God had told them they were ready to go into the land, but it says it didn't benefit them. It didn't do them any good because they didn't have the message mixed with faith. Okay? We have good news as well, but it's not going to do us any good if it's not mixed with faith. So when we study this and when we read this, we need to be thinking about ourselves and not just blaming those terrible Israelites. Okay? All right. So in the text, then, as we come to back to Numbers, as we've said, the cloud has lifted. The people have moved from Mount Sinai, and they are up now in Kadesh Barnea. All right, so right on the edge of the promised land there, on the southern edge of the promised land. So that as we come to chapter 13, the whole point then is that they're ready. God is ready for them now to go in and take the land. Okay? So first, before they're going to go in to take the land, God gives a command, speaks to Moses, and says to choose men to spy out the land. All right? So the command is to choose 12 men, one from each tribe. And it gives us the list of the names there in verses 1 through 16 of who the men were from each tribe. Most interesting, of course, is Caleb, who was from the tribe, what tribe? Judah. Okay, so Caleb was from the tribe of Judah. And then Hoshea, as it's listed first, or then in verse 16 tells us that Moses renamed him Joshua. Okay, so we know him as Joshua, and he was from the tribe of what? Ephraim. Okay, Ephraim, yes. All right, so he's from the tribe of Ephraim. All right, so from Joseph. All right, so again, we've mentioned this before, but we see kind of another example here of the leadership of Judah and to an extent of Ephraim, how they're kind of rising to the top. Remember, as the people marched, what tribe was in front? Judah. And what tribe was the leader of the group in the back? Ephraim. Okay, so there's kind of their leadership, but there's kind of this rivalry as well that we'll keep seeing. All right. Notice Joshua's name was changed by Moses. Moses is the one who calls him Joshua. Joshua meaning Yahweh saves. We've mentioned that. We'll talk more about that when we get to the book of Joshua. But just kind of note that now because his name is important, and his name was actually given by Moses. It's not his given name. All right? Okay, so the 12 spies, one from each tribe. Beginning of verse 17, what were the instructions to the spies? What was their job? Cindy.
They were supposed to go spy out the land of Canaan.
Okay.
And find out what the land is like, and what the produce is like, how it involves, what the cities are like. Are they big, they small? Can it be, all the ins and outs of the everyday living.
Right, okay, so they're supposed to go see what the land is like, all right? So the instruction is go see the land. Are the people strong or weak? Are they few or many? Do they live in camps or strongholds? So in other words, fortified cities. Are they rich or are they poor? Go see the land, the trees, bring some of the fruit back, all right? That's the instruction, and then how does he conclude the instruction to them? in verse 20. Verse 20.
Says, be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land.
Yeah.
And it's kind of season for grapes.
All right, be of good courage, all right, which is, of course, an important Bible phrase, an important Bible thought, but that's the instruction to them. Be of good courage, be strong, be of good courage. And note, this is the instruction that they're supposed to bring back information about the land, all right? But the idea of God giving them the land was already a given, all right? That wasn't part of the instructions to go figure that out. It was already given. Look at verse 2. Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. Okay? So the ability to take it, God giving them the land was already understood, should have already been understood as a given. Okay, that wasn't part of the instructions. All right, so they do it. They go up into the land. So here's kind of a map, the red line here. You see at the very bottom left corner there, Kadesh Barnea. And it describes the cities that they go through, Hebron and so on, all the way up to, it says, near Label Hamath, which is way, way up north. Okay, so they cover the land well. All right, they go all the way up north, well north of the Sea of Galilee there, and north of Damascus. So they cover the entire stretch of the land. All right, so they do well in that. We're told about some of the fruit that they bring back. All right, so when they come back then, beginning in verse 26, how long were they gone? 40 days, all right, put that in the back of your mind, because that's going to be important. All right, so 40 days, and what's their initial report about the land? What do they say about it, beginning there in verse 26 through 29? What do they say about it? Lamarck. Okay. Okay, all right, what else?
They said it is the land flowing from the land, just like God said. That is flowing from the land.
Okay,
Fruit,
yeah.
but
Yeah. All right, the land flows with milk and honey. All right, which is, as you said, exactly what God promised. Exodus 3, all the way back to when the people were in Egypt. God said he was going to bring them into a land flowing with milk and honey. Exodus 3, verses 8, verse 17. I'm going to bring you into a land flowing with milk and honey. The spies go up into the land and they see it, and what do they say? It flows with milk and honey. In other words, it's a phrase that it's a good land. It's a fertile land. There's food. It's a good, fertile land. Okay? All right, what else do they say? Okay, the people are strong. Yeah.
that there are giants and that we're like grasshoppers in their eyes.
Okay. The people are strong. The cities are fortified and large. All right, so these aren't just guys out there camping. They're in fortified, walled cities, large cities. And it talks about the Anakim, or the Nephilim. All right, same word as Genesis 6. Remember before the flood, it talks about the giants, the warriors. Okay, so the Anakim are there. All right, and it talks about being, later on, it's going to talk about being grasshoppers. Okay, so this is the report. So kind of just, initially, it's just the facts. All right, here's the facts of the land. Okay? But, yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
They also bring fruit back. But
Yep.
the fruit is so big they have to literally carry it on a pole, but that's just one cluster.
Yeah, all right, so to demonstrate how good the land is, they're carrying the fruit, the grapes, on a pole. They tie it up to a pole and have to carry it between two men. So we have kind of the famous, that mental picture of how huge the fruit of the land is, all right, and how fertile it is. All right, good. Yeah, Bill. Yep, and figs and pomegranates. All right, so these are sort of, I guess, exotic. Again, demonstrating the kind of the wealth of the land. All right. When we're told in verse 30, so after they sort of present just the facts, in verse 30, Caleb quieted the people. So what does that tell you? Yeah, they were already riled up. Just kind of hearing that, and especially hearing the part about the Anakim, the giants in the land, the fortified cities, they're already in an uproar. So Caleb has to quiet them down. Okay, so Caleb is one of the spies, and he says, we are well able to overcome it. We can do this. Okay, so he's quieting them down. that we need to, just calm down here, and this can be done, okay? But then the spies pipe up again, and what do they say? We can't. They disagree. We are not able to go against the people of the land. The land devours its inhabitants. Yeah.
They were right. They were not able to conquer the land.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So from a perspective, from an earthly perspective, right, a human perspective, they are right. They're not able to go. They seem like grasshoppers. They were going to get stepped on like bugs if we go up against these people.
I think it's important to notice and keep in mind, they said we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes and also in the eyes of the people there. That's what really the big problem was. They were looking at how little they were compared to these very large people rather than looking at how big God was.
Exactly. Perspective, right? From the perspective of their own eyes and what they see, right? Go back to Genesis, what we see versus what God sees, okay? In their perspective, they were small, unable to do it, all right? The problem, as we kind of already hinted at, is God never asked for their opinion on their ability to take the land, okay? Their input on whether they were able to take the land was not part of the job.
Goliath was probably a descendant of some of these. And according to what I've read, he was on the small side. For them to be considered like grasshoppers. Robert Wardlow, he was 8, 9 feet tall, about the Goliath was. So these men were quite a bit bigger.
And it's really hard for us to even think about because we don't really have that example, If you've ever come up and, an NBA player, somebody, 6'9", 6'10", they look so huge, right? It's hard. When you come up against them, all of a sudden you're like, wow, okay? Imagine someone 9 foot, 10 foot, maybe more tall, right? Okay, strong, warriors. All right, so they're intimidated, okay? Again, based on their own side, what they saw. And I think it's important to remember that these men who were chosen were leaders of the people. So these were already people, these were already men who were respected, who were looked up to for their opinion. They chose one from each tribe, right? So presumably they chose the one who was respected, looked up to, and these people are coming back and saying we can't do it. And obviously the people already were upset, but then when they say, no, we can't do it, that's bottom, right? That's it, yeah.
It seems like Caleb is the only one that remembered what God said. Caleb and Joshua, they're the only two that remembered.
Absolutely.
And all the other people just forgot, even if they're leaders.
Absolutely, and they're the two who try. They're going to try again in chapter 14. Okay, but I think there's a lesson here on leadership, on the importance of leadership, and there are moments, difficult moments, when strong leadership is especially important. Okay, I would just say, for an example, I greatly appreciate our elders' leadership with the news of Bill's retirement coming up and the way they presented that and the way they announced it. Those are difficult moments for us as a group, okay, and the way they presented that, with compassion, helping us along, understanding, hey, this is going to be okay. Those are important moments for leaders, and it's just having good leadership is so important that people don't have that, except obviously from Moses, but in this case from Caleb and Joshua. Yeah, Mark.
There's so many great things about God's will. Even when we look at Genesis up to where we are now, He doesn't really need us to participate in anything He does. He wants us to join Him in His work. I think the hardest part is with our free will. Like to make sense sometimes. We see that in the story here. And His covenant, His promises, His promotion was.
Yeah, and I agree. And we'll talk more about that as we go into chapter 14 and see their reaction and see how God responds to them. All right, so going into chapter 4, go ahead, Bill.
We see pretty much an identical situation, they don't mention Goliath. You get there, about David and Goliath, it's almost the exact same thing, and that is, you've got the king there who was head and shoulders over everybody else, so he was obviously over 6 feet tall. Not nearly as big as Goliath, but still he's king, and nobody wants to go fight that guy, including the king, so the leadership there wasn't worth it. And David came, and what he did was look at Goliath and think, well, he's no match for our God here, you know. And he even told Goliath, you come to me with a javelin and a spear, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. And this day he will make quick work at you. And so it's almost exactly the exact same thing. It's really amazing comparison.
Yeah.
David's faith as opposed to the army of Israel that was supposed to be there to fight, but they weren't fighting.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And again, and the point again is really going to be, even though it seems like in the people's sight this is a impossible task, really what God is not asking them to do is not hard at all, because He's going to fight for them. They just have to go, right? That's it. And when you get to the book of Joshua, that's what they do. It's literally like they just go and God does all the fighting. But they're not seeing it that way. All right, so they rebel. So they listen. We come to chapter 14. They listen to the 10 spies. Once they get that word from them, they raise a loud cry. They wept that night, and they grumble against Moses and Aaron. Okay, which has been their normal pattern. When they get upset, they're going to complain against the leaders, right? Moses and Aaron. And what do they say specifically? Pam.
The whole congregation says, what that we had died in the land of Egypt, or what if we died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword?
Yeah. Would it be better if we had died in Egypt or died in the wilderness than to just come here and get slaughtered in trying to come into the land? All right. And then they say our wives and children will become prey. Right, so they're concerned for their family. We're just going to go up, and our kids are, our families, our kids, they're just going to become like, prey before the wild animals. All right? And so, conclusion, let us, which, whenever you see that phrase, in terms of humans making plans, it's always bad. Okay? Think about the Tower of Babel, right? Let us build a tower up to the heavens, okay, right? Pharaoh in Egypt. When we say let us, when we come up with the plans, here's our plan, guys, it's a bad one, all right? And the plan is, let's choose a new leader and go back. That's our best option. Facing what we're facing, our best option, new leader, Moses, you're out. We're going to get a new leader and go back. Okay? Yeah.
When you said it that way, it just reminded me that they didn't choose that leader.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Like they have all this power.
Exactly. Right.
And they didn't choose it.
Right. They were the ones who chose Moses. They got out of Egypt on their own power. They crossed the Red Sea, right? None of that. Right? But now they're in charge and they're going to get it right. Right. Okay? All right. So Joshua and Caleb try again. And verses 5 through 10, well, first of all, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces, and Joshua and Caleb speak up. They tore their clothes, the sign of anger, of mourning, and they speak to the people. And what's their argument? What are some of the arguments that they make to the people? Cindy.
That the land is definitely exceedingly good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, He will bring us into the land and give it to us.
Okay, so it's a good land. It's exactly what God promised, and He'll bring us in. Tawana, is that what you were going to say? Okay? You have another one?
They remind them that the Lord promised them this, and
Yeah.
that He will be with them.
Right. It's not a matter of if we are able or not. That's not the point, because God's going to give it to us. Okay? So again, you're right. We're not able, they don't say this, but the point being, you're right, we're not able to, but that doesn't matter because God's giving it to us.
I like the phrase in verse 9 when he says, their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Same thing, except this means where they
Yes. Yes. Right? Turning it around, right? They are our prey because God is on our side, right? Yeah.
I like how he predicates it on if the Lord is pleased with us.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yes.
What you're saying, he ain't gonna be pleased.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Okay? So, do not rebel. All right? This is rebellion. This isn't just, oh, we don't think we're, this is rebellion against God, against what God wants, and do not fear. And those two go together. We don't always think of it that way, but their fear, because of what they see, the way they're looking at it, their perspective, their fear of man is leading them to rebel against God. Okay? So the question is, not posed, but the point is, are they going to fear man or are they going to trust God? And which do they choose? Fear man. Their answer is, we're going to stone them. Caleb and Joshua, don't like what you're saying, we'll kill you. Choose a new leader, go back. That's their plan. Okay? So, doesn't work. So, disaster. Disaster strikes. What's God's response in verses 11 and 12? It's going to have a couple responses, but what's the first response in 11 and 12? Pam.
He says, how long will these people despise me? And how long will they not believe in spite of all the signs that I have done?
Yeah, right. How long will the people despise me? It wasn't really about Moses and Aaron at all. They are just the representatives that they can see and go grumble to. The reality is they were despising God. It's exactly like when the people choose a king, right? And God says to Samuel, thank you. I was thinking that. God says to Samuel, it's not, they haven't rejected you, they rejected me. Same thing here. Okay? Ultimately, they're rejecting God.
The New American Standard uses the word spurn. How long will people spurn me?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that.
Right.
I mean, it's just basically the same thing as despise, but it has pretty much the connotation of just totally rejecting, paying no attention. What I'm saying, that you don't give it any validity as far as what is promising us. So God says, man,
Yeah.
people are just totally rejecting me all the time.
Exactly. Exactly. And how long will they not believe in me? Right? So there's the point. The reality is they didn't believe. They didn't have faith. They didn't trust what God said. Because if they did, they would go in and take it. Because it's a good land. But they don't trust. In spite of all the signs that I have done. But everything God has done for them to give them a reason to believe. It's not, yes, from a human perspective, he's asking a difficult thing, but he's given them every reason to believe, this is all the signs that he's done for them, that he's going to do what he says. Okay? So, Hebrews 3:19, which we read, we see they could not enter because of unbelief. Okay? Yeah.
It's interesting that later, right after Carla gives this, her vision of it, the people of the land who weren't believers in God were afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They were afraid that these big people, that they, that they were going to say, we can't go in because of them, and said, no, we were all afraid because we heard about your God, so we were afraid.
Yeah. Yeah, in a certain sense, the people of the land have more belief in God's power at this point than his own people do. That's a good point. Okay? All right, and so then what's God's solution?
I'll just wipe it all out.
Okay? I'll wipe you out and do what? Start over with Moses. I will make a greater and stronger nation out of you, Moses. Okay? Dale, was you? Oh, no, okay. All right, so what does that sound like when God says that? Does that remind you of another event?
Yeah, the golden calf.
Yeah, the golden calf. Pretty much the exact same thing God said in the golden calf, Exodus 32 and verse 10. I'm done with these people. They've broken my covenant. I'll wipe them out, and I'll start over again with you, Moses. So this is the second time God is essentially giving Moses the opportunity to be the new Abraham, to be the new father of his people. Yeah.
So the time is gone.
Okay? In what way?
Which way? Because he did that. He did that already.
Yeah, he did start over again with Noah, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, good point. All right, so there's a whole lot of parallels, especially starting now, to the golden calf episode. All right, the devastation of that moment when God just made the new covenant with His people, and they immediately break it, and God says, "Okay, I'm done with you guys. I'm starting over." Exact same kind of thing happening here. The culmination when they should be going into the land, and the people reject it. And God says, okay, I'm done with you guys, I'm starting over. All right, so what does Moses do?
Praise God and intercede for them.
Right, so Moses intercedes for the people just like Jesus intercedes for us. Very good, but that's what just like the golden calf with Moses, right? Same thing happened there, where Moses intercedes on behalf of the people, and implores God to forgive him. All right, so what is Moses, verses 13 through 19, what are Moses' arguments to God on behalf of the people? Yeah.
One of them said, these people have hurt you. They're afraid of you. If you stop now, they're going to say, well, you can go that far, and
Right. The Egyptians and the nations will hear of it, which is a similar argument that he made at the golden calf. Okay, but this time it's not just the Egyptians. He says all the nations will hear of it. In other words, the nations that you're going toward will hear of it. They know you've brought them this far. They've seen the cloud and the fire, and these are crazy events. These people know what's coming, and if they stop now, they'll say it was because God just wasn't strong enough. He couldn't do it. He started it, but he couldn't finish it.
Yeah, that second word that will say that God couldn't do it. In the book of Isaiah, one of the things that God says at a very important time about who He was and what He was is, anything that I say I'm going to do, it's good and done. So it will always be accomplished. I will never fail. And so Moses is saying, that's your nature, that you do whatever you say you can do. And if you don't bring these people through, then all these heathen nations are going to say, well, he's no better than our God. He can't do nothing no better than ours.
That's right. So he's appealing to God's nature here. Okay, so he's not just saying this is what I want. He's appealing to God's nature. What's the second way he appeals to God's nature? What does he say about God? Yeah, Jacob.
he shares with them his characteristics.
Okay?
He's long-suffering, he's slow to anger, loving kindness, forgiving.
Yeah. The Lord is slow to anger and forgiving. And when he says that, he is directly quoting from Exodus 34. So after Exodus 32, Moses and God kind of have this little back and forth. In that case, they both talk a couple times. But the last time, this is what God says about himself in Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. After he kind of listens to Moses and says, okay, and relents, in that case, these are God's own words to describe himself, that from Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty. All right, that is exact quote what God said about himself. Okay? So Moses is saying, God, this is who you are. You are a God who is slow to anger. You are a God who forgives. He's appealing to God's nature and then saying, please forgive them again. You forgave them before. Even in the golden calf episode, you forgave them. Please forgive again. That's who you are. Okay? And what does God do about that? Verse 20. He pardons. God relents again. According to your word, Moses, what you said. All right, so again, this sort of amazing relationship that Moses has with God, where he can actually intercede on the people's behalf, and in a sense, almost change God's mind. At least change what God said. But of course, God's the one who makes the ultimate decision. And remember, when he appears to change God's mind, he does that by appealing to who God really is anyway. Right? Okay, so he's not actually changing God's mind. He's appealing to who God is. Okay? Yes?
What does me about God, John, is what you did in the end. He has always, in the Old Testament, get someone to represent something that Jesus is going to do.
Yep.
So that's where the repetition comes in. So, he got Moses,
so is that it? God relents and he pardoned and we're done. Okay. Verse 21, but I have pardoned, I've listened to you, Moses, but. And then there's a big, huge, long list of buts. And hugely tragic but. Right? Starting with, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of God. Okay, which is an amazing phrase. It reminds me back of Leviticus chapter 10. Remember Nadab and Abihu? And after they sin and after they're killed, immediately what does God say? Yes. By those who draw near me, I will be glorified. In other words, all the earth will be filled with the glory of God one way or another. Either you're going to do it, either we make the choice to glorify God, or he's going to make it happen. And he's going to make it happen in a way we don't like. But either way, God is going to be glorified. Okay? If you've seen some of the news lately about like the Olympics and the opening ceremonies and so on, some people pointed out God will not be mocked. Right? That's the point. Okay? So, God will be glorified, and specifically then, what does that mean? What's going to be the consequence?
God says that those who have tested me these 10 times, they will not enter.
Yep. None of those who saw God's glory, again, they've seen it before. He's given them the signs. They know, they should know who he is. Think back to Exodus. Remember we talked Exodus over and over again about how God, with the repetition of the word know, that God is causing them to know who he is. He has given them all the signs to see his glory, but they kept testing him. He says none of those people are going to see the land. They saw his glory, but they're not going to see his land. God did signs in Egypt, and he did signs in the wilderness. All right, and we could go over the list, right? The plagues on Egypt, the crossing the Red Sea, bringing them to, defeating the Amalekites when they weren't even warriors yet. All the signs, all his appearances on the Mount Sinai, everything he's done for them. They've already won battles. Remember, on the east side, they've already won battles. Okay? Yeah.
In your research, did you figure out what these 10 times were?
Okay, so yes, that's a good point. So I saw him at Byron Nash. I was sat in his class one time and he went through this, and he had a chart, and I couldn't find it, so I want to ask him that. He had a chart going back showing there's exactly 10 times the people have rebelled. When you go back and look, starting, including the golden calf, but including all the times they didn't have water, and they rebelled, and they complained, you can go back and count 10 times up till now. It's literally 10, okay? But the point is, they've seen it, and they're not, and they still don't believe, okay? But here he lists one exception, and it's going to become two exceptions. Who's the first exception? Caleb. Why?
Because he has a different spirit and problem before.
He has a different spirit. He was different than everybody else. His spirit was different. And he follows me fully. Because of that, he will possess the land. All right? All right. So, he goes on. So, he says in verse 25, therefore, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness. Right? If we were going back to our map, I don't have the map up there again, but if we were going up the map, they were going the north from Sinai up to the land. God says turn and go back the other way. In fact, he says turn and go back to the Red Sea, or towards the Red Sea. Okay, set out for the Red Sea. You were going that way, so now turn and go back the other way. And then he says, I have heard their grumbling. Okay? And that word heard is loaded, because he doesn't just mean that sound came to his ears. He says, what you have said, I will do. In other words, he heard it. I heard you. That's what we say, right? I heard you. I got it. I'm going to do it. That's what God says. Okay, I heard you, so we'll do what you want. And what did they say they wanted? Back in verse 2, yeah. Yeah, remember verse 2? Would that we had died in the wilderness. God says, okay, your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness. Would it not be better for us to go back? Verses 3 and 4. God says, okay, turn, head for the wilderness, back to the Red Sea. God gave them what they wanted. It wasn't what he wanted for them, but he gave them what they wanted. And we need to think about that. Hebrews 3, this is not about Israel. Remember Hebrews 3? God will give us what we want. And we need to think about that. He goes on. I, the Lord, have spoken. Your dead bodies shall fall in the wilderness. He says that 3 times in this section. Repetition of dead, dead, dead. Your dead bodies will fall in the wilderness. Everyone from the census they took at the beginning of the chapter, everyone from that census will not come into the land. That means everyone 20 years old and up, that entire generation, except Joshua and Caleb, the ones who brought the good report. Everyone else from that generation will not come into the land. And then he says, the children that you said will be prey will inherit the land that you rejected. They said, we don't want to go up into the land because our children will become prey. God says, those children, they're the ones who are going to get the land, not you, because you rejected it. They're not going to be prey. They're the ones who are going to take the land. But the children will suffer for your unfaithfulness. In other words, they're going to travel for 40 years. Those children should be spending those 40 years in the promised land, in the land of milk and honey, receiving all the blessings that God has promised. Instead, those children get to wander around aimlessly for 40 years watching their parents die off. So those children are going to get the land, but they're going to suffer for 40 years because of what you did. Because of your choice right now. Do children sometimes suffer for their parents' lack of faith? Absolutely.
I also think of the fact that those parents, the people, the predecessors of these children, they're going to be suffering because they're going to have to watch their children suffer through these 40 years.
Yeah.
So,
God's already told them what it's going to be, so they're just going to, yep. So they're going to wander for 40 years, a day for each day of the spying. Okay, remember I said put that, a year for each day. Okay? All right. So, they disobey again. All right, so first of all, the 10 spies die by plague. Reminder of the 10 plagues in Egypt, the signs that God gave them. Now the 10 spies die by plague. Okay? So Israel at that point figures out that they've sinned, they mourn, but they still aren't obedient. Right? Moses warns them, don't go up now, it's too late. God's not with you. The Lord is not among you. But they don't listen. Okay, we're ready to go, God. We're sorry. Here we go. We're going. And they're defeated by the Amalekites. Remember when God was with them in Exodus 17? Right after they crossed the Red Sea, they defeated the Amalekites. Now they lose to the Amalekites. Why? Because God's not with them. The same thing Caleb and Joshua have been telling them. If God's with you, you're going to win. If he's not, you're going to lose. It's not about you. It's about God and whether we're obedient to God or not. Okay? All right. So, our applications for today. Number 1, God will give you what you want. And we don't really think of it that way most of the time. But the thing that we want deep down, God will give it to us. So the question is, what's in my heart? Remember Matthew 6:21? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The thing that we really want, God will give it to us. And if that's heaven, then we'll do what he says and God will give it to us. If it's not, then he'll give us that. But that's all he'll give us. And so the question is, am I trained to want what God wants? Remember Dan Starr in his meeting kept hitting on this point about being trained to see what God sees and ultimately to want what God wants. And then the very last lesson, that it's not what God wants from us, it's what God wants for us. What God wanted for the people was this beautiful land of promise, of abundance and wealth. But they didn't want it enough to trust him to go take it. And so God said, okay, you want the wilderness? I'll give it to you, but that's it. Same thing. God tells us, okay, you want this world? You're in love with this world? I'll give it to you, but that's it. Point number 2, am I willing to have a different spirit like Caleb did? And remember, he did that by following God fully. Am I following God fully, or am I following everyone else? And remember, this isn't just Caleb versus the world. This is Caleb versus God's people. Are we willing to have a different spirit even against God's people if we see that it's opposed to what God said? And fear and lack of belief lead to rebellion against God. That's where they end up. So we have to find those things and root them out before they lead to rebellion. All right, good. Thank you very much. And then